Look at your social media feed. Just 3 years ago, the formula to virality was simple. You rent a fake private jet for 2 hours, flash a leased high-end sports car, post a screenshot of your leveraged crypto portfolio, and tell everyone you are a financial genius. It was the era of peak flexing. But turn on TikTok today, and the trend has completely inverted. You see 20-somethings filming themselves actively rejecting a $100 dinner invitation. They are not hiding it. They are loud. They call it loud budgeting. They look straight into the camera and say, "I have the money, but I am choosing not to spend it because I am prioritizing my future." Mainstream media is eating this up. They are calling it a cultural renaissance, a sudden wave of financial maturity washing over Gen Z. But they are missing the entire point. This is not a sudden moral awakening. This is a calculated psychological defense mechanism. This is the aesthetic optimization of financial panic. And if you think this is just a harmless TikTok trend, you are completely misreading the massive macroeconomic engine that forced this shift into existence. The financial press loves a simple narrative. They want you to believe that consumers suddenly woke up, read a textbook on value investing, and decided that conspicuous consumption is bad. They frame loud, budgeting as a victory of individual willpower over consumer culture. But here's the thing. Humans do not change their social signaling behavior overnight unless the underlying structural incentives force them to. For nearly a decade, the global economy operated under a regime of 0% interest rates. Capital was practically free. When money is free, debt is cheap, and leverage is easy to mask. You could buy a luxury lifestyle on a retail salary using buy, now pay later services, low-interest credit lines, and overvalued tech stocks. Flexing wasn't a sign of wealth. It was a sign of cheap liquidity. So, what changed? Did Gen Z suddenly become wiser than their predecessors? No. The macro environment shifted, the economic plumbing broke, and the cost of maintaining the illusion of wealth became mathematically impossible. To understand why people are suddenly bragging about being broke, we have to look at the transition from the easy money era to our current reality. Between 2020 and 2022, global central banks flooded the system with historic amounts of liquidity. Asset prices detached from fundamental reality. If you bought an index fund, a speculative tech stock, or a digital image of a monkey, you made money. The economic feedback loop rewarded risk-taking and punished savings. In that environment, paymer, kimewahan, or flexing was the dominant social signal, because the market told you that tomorrow would always be richer than today. Consumer confidence was structurally inflated by artificial wealth effects. Then came the bill. Inflation hit multi-decade highs. Central banks were forced to pull the emergency brake. They raised interest rates at the fastest pace in modern history. Suddenly, the yield on capital went up, but the cost of servicing existing debt went up even faster. The free money party didn't just end. The bouncers locked the doors and started collecting debts. Now let's look at the hidden mechanism that drives loud budgeting. It is not about saving money on lattes. It is about the structural destruction of disposable income. Meet Bob. Bob is a 24-year-old corporate worker. 2 years ago, Bob could afford to go out every weekend, wear designer sneakers, and subscribe to 5 different lifestyle services. How? Because his rent was manageable. His student loans were paused, and if he ran out of cash, he could split his purchases into 4 interest-free installments using an app on his phone. Fast forward to today. Let's look at Bob's financial plumbing. The rent squeeze. Housing costs and rent have structurally adjusted upward due to sticky inflation and a frozen housing market. A massive chunk of Bob's paycheck is gone before he even opens his eyes on the first of the month. The debt trap. Credit card interest rates are hovering near historic highs. The buy, now pay later industry is tightening credit limits because default rates among young borrowers are surging. The real wage illusion. Even if Bob got a 5% raise, real wages, adjusted for the actual cost of groceries, insurance, and utilities, have stagnated or decreased. Bob is facing a mathematical reality. His disposable income is approaching zero. He can no longer afford the $100 dinner, period. But human psychology cannot tolerate the stigma of poverty. If Bob tells his friends, "I can't come out because I am broke," he loses social status. He feels like a failure in the capitalist hierarchy. So, what does the modern consumer do when they can no longer afford the game? They change the rules of the game. They don't say, "I am poor." They say, "I am loud budgeting." By rebranding financial necessity as an intentional lifestyle choice, Bob converts his economic weakness into cultural capital. He takes a structural deficit and turns it into a moral virtue. It is brilliant marketing, but it is driven by sheer economic desperation. This is where individual choices turn into a systemic feedback loop. Loud budgeting is the final domino in a macro chain reaction that started inside the boardroom of the Federal Reserve. Let's trace the dominoes. 1. Domino 1. Central banks raise interest rates to suppress demand. 2. Domino 2. The cost of capital rises, causing corporations to cut costs, freeze hiring, and slow down wage growth. 3. Domino 3. Commercial banks tighten lending standards. Credit cards, auto loans, and mortgages become restrictive and highly expensive. 4. Domino 4. The consumer's financial cushion is completely depleted. Savings rates plunge to near historic lows as people use their reserves just to pay for necessities. 5. Domino 5. The social signaling mechanism breaks. When a huge portion of the population is struggling, displaying luxury doesn't create envy, it creates alienation and resentment. 6. Domino 6. The market creates a new social currency. If you cannot win by spending, you win by optimizing. Content creators realize that de-influencing and loud budgeting generate higher engagement because they resonate with the collective anxiety of an exhausted middle class. The trend becomes viral, not because it is an inspiring philosophy, but because it is an accurate reflection of macroeconomic contraction. The system is forcing consumers to downsize, and social media is simply providing the soundtrack for the retreat. We have seen this film before. Every major economic downturn creates its own version of aestheticized austerity. Look back at the 1970s during the era of stagflation, when the economy suffered from high inflation and stagnant growth. The excessive fashion of the late 60s died. It was replaced by utilitarian clothing, thrift shopping, and DIY culture. Look at the 2008 global financial crisis. The era of the logomania and ultra-flashy, early 2000s fashion collapsed instantly. Suddenly, Wall Street executives were hiding their shopping bags, and the culture shifted toward recessionistas, people who made a game out of finding deals at discount stores. Human behavior is highly predictable. When liquidity is high, we flex asset price inflation. When liquidity is low, we flex spending discipline. The names change. The platforms change from print magazines to TikTok shorts. But the structural reality is identical. Loud budgeting is just the 2026 edition of a historical coping mechanism for an economy that has run out of cheap fuel. If you are an investor, a business owner, or simply trying to navigate your own portfolio, you need to understand the true gravity of this trend. Loud budgeting is a leading indicator of consumer demand destruction. When a generation of consumers begins to celebrate not spending money, it means aggregate demand in the economy is hitting a structural wall. Corporate earnings risks, companies that rely on discretionary spending, premium consumer brands, and middle-tier luxury, are going to see their margins compressed. If your business model relies on consumers using high-interest debt to buy things they don't need, your runway is shrinking. The liquidity reality, this trend confirms that the transmission mechanism of monetary policy is working exactly as intended. I rates are successfully breaking the back of the consumer. For your own personal finances, the lesson is simple. Do not mistake a viral trend for a permanent solution. Loud budgeting is a great way to normalize saying no to peer pressure, but it does not change the structural inflation of hard assets. Saving money on dinners is step one. Understanding where that money goes in a high-interest environment is step two. If you are just hoarding cash while real assets continue to reprice, you are still losing the broader game. The biggest risks in the financial world are rarely the ones broadcasted loudly on the headlines. The headlines talk about market highs and soft landings. But the real structural shifts happen quietly in the daily decisions of millions of people who are silently adjusting to a harsher economic reality. Loud budgeting is the proof that the average consumer is reaching their limit. They are just dressing it up in a neat, algorithmic bow. Pahami mezin pasarnya, sebelum Anda memperkaya narasi permukaannya. If you want to understand the hidden mechanics behind the trends that shape your money, your portfolio, and your economic future without the mainstream financial media fluff, hit the subscribe button. Leave a comment below. Are you loud budgeting because you want to? Or because the macro numbers are forcing your hand? Let's talk in the comments. See you in the next video.